Good afternoon. My name is Matt Gress, and I'm the Director of the Governor's Office of Strategic Planning and Budgeting. And today we will be going over the fiscal year 2022 executive budget briefing. The year 2020 began with a full display of the Arizona Way. We led the nation in poverty reduction. More than 175,000 Arizonans pulling themselves up out of poverty. We ranked second in terms of job growth, with more jobs than people to fill them. Fourth in weekly wage growth. Sixth in export growth. And then the COVID-19 pandemic hit with its unprecedented loss and economic hardship. That shock was stabilized with steady growth. And today, the fiscal year 2022 executive budget provides immediate attention to the needs of health and education after the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic, while looking beyond to a future of prosperity and growth that displays the compassion and innovation and resilience of the people we serve. Over the next hour, economy and state revenues, our view of the budget overall, and the particular priorities included in the executive budget, followed by an overview of the fiscal response to the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. So at this point, I will turn it over to our budget analyst forecaster, Zach Milne.
Thanks, Matt. My name is Zachary Milne. I'm a budget analyst and forecaster with OSPB. So I think it goes without saying that on many fronts, 2020 was a year unprecedented in nature, and with regards to the economy, this was no different. However, in the midst of these unprecedented times, the relative success of Arizona demonstrates the robustness of our economy and reinforces the efficacy of our smart and reasoned economic policies, which helps to make Arizona one of the best states to do business. In 2020, the country witnessed the decline in real GDP ever recorded at just over due to and producer activity as people hunkered down amidst the growing pandemic. Following this unprecedented decline, real GDP made back significant gains, posting an annualized 33% gain in the third quarter. These gains and losses are even more remarkable when compared to data from recent years. As shown in the chart, these recent movements in the national economy dwarf the prior two-year average real GDP growth of 2.4%, while quarter three gains put the U.S. economy back on a positive trajectory, with real GDP levels predicted to reach 2019 levels by the end of calendar year 2020. There remains significant ground to make up in the coming years for the U.S. economy to reach pre-pandemic trends. Much like with overall economic output, the U.S. labor market faced steep losses in the spring, with total non-farm employment shedding a record 20.5 million jobs in April alone. Additionally, U.S. unemployment rose to over 14% in April from a prior month level of just over 4%. Following these steep declines in April, the labor force did begin to slowly recover, but remains well below pre-COVID levels. The Arizona economy suffered significant losses during the onset of the pandemic as well. However, the losses experienced in Arizona were of a significantly smaller magnitude than what was experienced in the U.S. as a whole and in most other states. While the U.S. suffered GDP losses of over 31%, Arizona lost just over 25% of its annual economic output, placing Arizona third amongst all states in terms of the smallest GDP losses faced during the onset of the pandemic. Additionally, despite having a similarly composed labor market, Arizona experienced much lower employment declines than the nation as a whole, as detailed in the left portion of the figure. While employment losses in April approached a historic 14% for the US, Arizona experienced losses of just over 9%, now significant in and of themselves, but much less than the nation as a whole. As of November, Arizona employment has recovered to roughly 97% of pre-COVID-19 levels, surpassing the nation's gains by 3% and ranking Arizona an impressive 6th among all states. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, Arizona was on a strong trajectory in terms of revenue performance. And while the pandemic certainly had an effect, Arizona revenues in fiscal year 21 have shown remarkable in the face of these unprecedented economic declines. As shown in the figure, actual general fund revenues continue to surpass the previously enacted projections month after month. This relatively strong performance can be attributed to, among other things, the robust pre-COVID-19 economic environment in Arizona, a competitive and pro-business tax and regulatory environment, and a targeted and thoughtful approach to public health measures that protects both lives and livelihoods. This robustness has translated into $917.8 million in general fund revenues beyond what was contemplated in the fiscal year 2021 budget. As can be seen in this figure, all three major tax sources for general fund revenues have contributed to the strong performance discussed so far. The solid blue bars represent projections, while the yellow bars represent actual performance thus far. Of particular note is income tax revenues, which as of December stand at an impressive 25.8% above this same time period in fiscal year 2020, or 14.2% above the prior enacted budget. This year-to-date growth translates to $352 million additional revenues beyond what was contemplated in the fiscal year 21 budget, just in individual income taxes. Part of this performance is attributable to the deferral of individual income tax filing date from April 15th in tax year 2019, shifting an estimated $600 million in revenues from fiscal year 2020 to 21. However, even after accounting for this $600 million deferral, individual income tax revenues remain at an impressive 3.2% year-over-year growth to date. The recent revenue performance does little to support the existence of a worldwide recession, but it's important to stay grounded in our assumptions about future revenues, given both the scope and unprecedented nature of this particular economic situation. In light of this, the executive budget contemplates an impressive 8.3% growth in total ongoing general fund revenues in fiscal 2021, partly due to the aforementioned income tax deferral, followed by positive yet more modest growth rates in the following years. While the Arizona economy overall continues to be a relative success story during COVID-19, the unfortunate reality is that people and businesses in Arizona have suffered great losses. The executive recognizes the sacrifices that countless Arizonans have made to combat the virus and seeks to institute meaningful reform to pave the way for more expedient and equitable recovery for all Arizonans. The executive supports conforming to federal tax changes as seen in the CARES Act, such as deduction for charitable contributions, HSA usage for prescription drugs, and business interest deduction. Second, the executive is committed to working with legislative leadership in providing meaningful income tax reform, further boosting our state economy, ensuring that Arizona continues to be one of the most business-friendly states in the union. The executive budget sets aside $200 million for tax reform in fiscal year 22, which phases up to $600 million by fiscal year 24. Along with the income reform proposed, executives have followed rising revenues of the past years with increases in total spending, allowing this administration to make needed investments across the state. The fiscal year 22 budget continues the fiscal prudence of the administration throughout the pandemic, growing total ongoing spending by just 6.4%, while still maintaining all of the state's prior and new commitments, proving that we can be both fiscally responsible and meet the state's funding needs. Next, I'll turn it over to Adam, who will discuss the rainy day fund as well as some other key points in the executive budget.
Thank you, Zach. Good afternoon. My name is Adam. Currently, there is approximately $1 billion which was a goal of the governor and the legislature and was achieved to protect the state from a severe revenue downturn. During the pandemic, the state has spent $55 million from this fund for one-time public health costs. In comparison, other states have used their rainy day funds for budget shortfalls. Arizona's rainy day fund balance remains at 8.1% of total general fund revenues, which is slightly below the median of 8.4% across the country. Overall, Arizonans are relying on policymakers to ensure that Arizona remains a state full of opportunity for all. This year's executive budget remains focused on areas of true need that, if properly addressed, will have a lasting and positive impact on Arizona for the future in areas of education, public safety, natural resources, and infrastructure. The executive baseline anticipates just north of $1 billion before any baseline changes or executive initiatives. The baseline spends $574 million. Spending in this category includes our Medicaid programs, education increases, among many other baseline changes. The remaining $290 million is attributed to the executive initiatives. With an ending balance of $219 million, the executive budget keeps Arizona's fiscal future stable. The executive takes a balanced approach with funding, with both continued commitment to government at the speed of business and funding our future education. With large amounts of targeted federal dollars in education and welfare programs, the executive works to optimize the impact of that funding and prioritizing the most immediate needs during this very trying time for our state. The executive budget continues to fulfill the governor's commitment to being structurally and cash balanced every year, and the fiscal 22 budget is no exception. In fact, the fiscal 2022 executive budget is the 6th consecutive structurally balanced budget. As you can see in the diagonal green bars, the executive anticipates beginning fiscal 22 with cash reserves as the state continues to overperform revenue estimations. The executive budget invests these one-time resources in areas of highest need while limiting growth of ongoing spending, as denoted in the dark blue bars, as the one-time commitments fall out in the out years. Total spending decreases, paired with the revenue outlook that Zach presented, the state will remain structurally balanced through all years projected. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Bryce to talk about the executive's commitment to K-12 education.
Thank you, Adam. My name is Bryce Hawes, budget analyst at OSPB. Most schools across the state made the difficult decision to go virtual for extended periods of time over the last year. Many of our schools adapted quickly and effectively to remote learning, but unfortunately, many students are still falling behind. Governor Ducey has grave concerns about the lack of learning and the widening of our achievement gap. For fiscal year 2022, the executive budget makes large K-12 investments with a keen focus on closing the achievement gap and targeting our lowest income learners to ensure that we're not letting them fall further behind. Based on currently available data, the executive budget anticipates a $389 million surplus as a result of K-12 formulaic spending reductions in fiscal year 2021. Driving these reductions is current year average daily membership well below what was contemplated in the enacted budget. The estimated current year formula funding decreases affecting local education agencies have been offset by approximately $2.2 billion of strategic state and federal funds. $389 million projected surplus from formulaic reductions is being reinvested in the form of remediation grants. $370 million of discretionary use coronavirus relief funds were allocated directly to districts and charters through the executive's enrollment stabilization grant program. $277 million of relief funds were made available through the first round of elementary and secondary school emergency relief, or ESSER fund allocations, and the second round of ESSER allocations will total approximately $1.2 billion. The executive budget includes supplemental fund fiscal year 2021 for a remediation grant program that supports high impact, results-oriented intervention and programming to mitigate the severe learning loss that has occurred since the COVID-19 pandemic began last spring. The funding provided is intended to be equivalent to the surplus resulting from lower than budgeted state formula funding. The executive budget addresses the educational crisis by allocating all expenditure reductions resulting from equalization formula decreases to providing for additional instruction for the students most in need. The initiative includes enough funding to provide at least $500 per student eligible for free reduced price meals to each district or charter school that applies to extend these remediation supports to students. The executive estimates this cost at approximately $298 million. The remaining $91 million of the projected surplus will be targeted to priority grade bands where students need critical support to stay on track in their educational development. These grade bands include eligible students who were enrolled in grades K through 3, 8, and 11 during the 2020-2021 school year. This targeted allocation ensures young students receive needed support during their most developmentally critical years. 8th grade students are prepared for the transition to high school, and 11th graders stay on track towards timely graduation. The additional allocation brings the total per pupil amount to more than $800 for eligible students in targeted grade bands. For fiscal year 2022, the executive budget includes $250 million in new K-12 education investments, including $105.8 million for enrollment growth, inflation, and other technical adjustments. This budget continues Governor Ducey's commitment to fund K-12 education above and beyond enrollment and inflation adjustments by providing an additional $144.5 million for initiatives that address teacher, student, and classroom needs. When choosing the best school for their family, parents must consider the transportation logistics of getting their child to and from the school they choose. Transportation issues often limit parents' available choices, as do varied enrollment deadlines and policies, which can often mean losing out on enrollment at the school of their choice. The executive's transportation and school choice package removes barriers to transportation. The executive budget provides $9.5 million for transportation solution grants to support transportation innovations that expand access to school choice, and $500,000 for an open enrollment month marketing campaign to inform parents about open enrollment options while also removing unreasonably short enrollment windows. The executive budget includes an increase in funding of $6.9 million to build upon the progress in early literacy learning and instruction. To prioritize and expedite support for students most in need, $3.1 million is allocated for deploying literacy coaches to the lowest performing pre-K through 3 schools to provide intensive technical assistance and improve effective teaching and literacy practices. The executive budget includes a funding increase of $1.5 million to implement a statewide kindergarten entry evaluation to demonstrate school readiness for young learners receiving early literacy support. Similar evaluations are already being used in 34 states and Washington, D.C. $1.3 million of dedicated funding is provided to the department to hire early literacy specialists, as well as funding for literacy education training that will enable educators to more effectively identify and instruct students with dyslexia and other early literacy learning difficulties. Finally, the executive budget recommends requiring new teachers to pass the Foundations of Reading evaluation, ensuring that all new educators are equipped to implement effective literacy education strategies. The budget includes a funding increase of $1 million to fully fund the anticipated costs associated with the assessment requirement. Arizona's education stakeholders are engaging in innovative ways to improve teaching and learning at all grade levels. The executive budget provides funding to scale these innovative approaches to benefit more students and communities across the state. $3 million is allocated to increasing access to the Expansion and Innovation Fund, which awards grants to K-12 schools that demonstrate true innovation in serving their students. $1.2 million of grants have already been awarded from the fund during the 2020-2021 school year to 17 charters and 7 districts that replicated and expanded capacity for successful models of schooling and instruction. These grants have so far benefited more than 20,000 students. $1 million is included to support fosters student ownership in their own learning, development, and support for educators. Continuing Governor Ducey's commitment to civics, the executive budget includes 2 new signature civics education programs. First, $1 million to establish the Civics Innovation Fund grant program to invest in schools with unique and engaging ideas to inspire and educate their students on what it means to be an American and the unique rights and responsibilities that Americans share. Second, $1 million to establish the Arizona Civics Corps pilot, which will provide post-secondary scholarships to an initial cohort of high school juniors and seniors who complete service hour requirements. Qualifying students will be eligible to earn up to a $1,000 scholarship each semester toward the in-state post-secondary institution of their choice. The executive budget includes funding for programs that set students up for success in the classroom and beyond. Earning college credit by passing qualifying exams allows Arizona students and families to save money on tuition and allows students to graduate sooner. In fiscal year 2022, Arizona students qualifying for free and reduced price meals are expected to take more than 19,000 college placement exams and pay out of pocket an average of $54 per test. The executive budget provides funding to eliminate this financial hurdle and enable qualifying students to take college placement exams free of charge. The executive budget also includes an increase in funding for the College Credit by Examination Incentive Program. The program was established in fiscal year 2018, and in fiscal year 2020, the number of passing exams generated demand for $7.5 million in incentive payments, or $2.5 million in excess of the $5 million appropriation. Awards were prorated to account for excess demand, and the funding provided is intended to fully meet that demand. During this time of greater than normal budget uncertainty, it is especially prudent to invest state funds in programs that have a proven track record of success. Consistent with that view, the executive budget provides an increase in funding for programs that have demonstrated successful outcomes for Arizona students. Jobs for Arizona Graduates is a nonprofit organization that helps young people stay in school and acquire the academic, personal, leadership, and vocational skills they need in order to succeed after graduation. Jobs for Arizona Graduates currently serves more than 1,300 young people in 29 programs in Arizona schools and communities, and the program has seen increases in GPA for 75% of participants. The executive budget also doubles the state's investment in the Alternative Teacher Development Program. The program accelerates the process of identifying, training, and placing highly qualified individuals into low-income schools, addressing teacher shortages and prioritizing communities with the greatest need. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Will Palmisano, to discuss the remaining education slides.
Thank you, Bryce. My name is Will Palmisano. I'm a budget manager here at OSPB. The School Facilities Board, or SFB, is the capital management agency for Arizona schools. SFB is mandated to ensure compliance with building adequacy standards and routine preventative maintenance guidelines for both new and existing buildings through the awarding of building renewal grant funds. Due to aging building systems, such as roofs and HVAC systems, building renewal grant spending has increased in each of the last 3 fiscal years. As detailed in gold on the graph, fiscal 21 building renewal grant spending is projected to exceed the current appropriation of $108 million. The agency anticipates renewal costs to be $38 million more than is accounted for in the fiscal 21 appropriation. The executive budget demonstrates a commitment to ensuring Arizona's school facilities are fully funded. First, the executive budget includes $38.8 million in supplemental funding for fiscal 21 building renewal grants, bringing the total fiscal 21 appropriation to $146.3 million. Second, the budget includes a total of $119 million in funding for fiscal 22 building renewal grants, which includes $17 million in ongoing funding, plus an increase in $102 million in one-time funding. This total appropriation increase over the fiscal 21 base appropriation of $107.5 million. In addition to overseeing the maintenance of existing school facilities, SFB also administers state funds to school districts that require the construction of new schools. Each year, SFB determines if districts will meet demographic benchmarks that will necessitate the construction of new schools. As such, 5 new facilities have been approved for construction in fiscal 22, with a total base funding amount of $40.9 million. The executive budget also includes funding for 2 schools that began construction in fiscal 21 at $11.7 million. In addition to K-12 education and school facilities, the executive budget also includes a total investment of $35 million for Arizona public universities. Governor Doug Ducey has also announced a $115 million for Arizona's 3 public universities in acknowledgement of the instrumental role they've played in the state's ongoing efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19. ASU, U of A, and NAU have stepped up to protect public health and ensure students continue to have opportunities during the pandemic. Today's funding will help cover some of the costs that were directly related to COVID-19, including testing and mitigation efforts, increased distance learning, student outreach, furlough prevention, and more. funding for these universities comes from the Coronavirus Relief Fund, or CRF, as part of the Federal CARES Act. The funding allocation will provide $40 million for ASU, $46 million for U of A, and $23 million for NAU. Last year's executive budget sought to make an ongoing $35 million general fund investment to advance the university system's workforce for the New Economy Initiative, to prepare more students for high-demand jobs in Arizona. This year's budget honors that commitment once again. Through the Teachers Academy, Arizona made a commitment to our aspiring teachers. You stay and teach in Arizona, and we'll cover your college tuition. Arizona Teachers Academy continues to see sustainable growth in the participation of prospective Arizona teachers. Fiscal 21 participation increased by over 61% from the prior year, with 3,173 students participating in the fall 2020 semester. Fall 2020 also saw the largest year-over-year participation increase in Teachers Academy inductions to date, with 745 new participants committed to educating Arizona students. Additionally, the diversity and composition of the program by grade has also grown with the program. Next, my colleagues Steph Spera and Angel Flores will discuss the health and welfare portion of the executive budget.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Spera, and I'm a budget analyst at OSPB. State government's fundamental purposes include providing critical services and support for the health and wellness of all Arizonans. The fiscal year 2022 executive budget addresses issues related to long-term care, specific public health initiatives, access to child care, substance use disorder treatment, and responding to caseload growth for vulnerable adults and the developmentally disabled. This slide highlights executive priorities at the Department of Health Services in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Since the start of the emergency, the department has received $585 million in state and federal resources, including a $55 million deposit into the Public Health Emergency Fund. The state has prioritized testing and tracing efforts, as well as the purchase of PPE and other equipment to slow the spread of the virus and ensure Arizona's frontline workers and most vulnerable populations are protected. In addition, the executive worked to offset $105 million in payroll costs at both the Department of Health Services and hospitals statewide to free up funding in those agencies' existing budgets to use in response to the emergency. $28 million in medical support in the form of alternate care sites, warm sites, post-acute beds, and funding to hire nursing and medical staff was also provided, as well as $14 million for community programs statewide that have had the scope of their work affected by COVID-19. These include immunization and vaccination management programs, education, violence prevention services, support to individuals with HIV/AIDS, and children's recreation services. The executive budget includes $3.3 million from the general fund for the Department of Health Services to hire 32 additional long-term care surveyors. Long-term care surveyors are responsible for investigating and resolving complaints made against long-term care facilities statewide. An Auditor General study performed in 2019 found that high caseload at the division contributed to resolution times that exceeded the 6-month goal. At the end of the 9-month study, only 54% of cases that had been opened at the beginning of the study had been resolved. It is the executive's priority that cases open against long-term care facilities are addressed and resolved in a timely and efficient manner to protect the populations they serve. The additional staff are expected to decrease caseload from 108 cases per year per surveyor to 45 per year, and further enhance the division's ability to meet the 6-month resolution benchmark. Next, the fiscal year 2022 executive budget includes an increased appropriation for the Child Care and Development Fund of $18 million to maintain the suspension of the child care waitlist. Eliminating the waitlist allows 3,000 more children to be served each month. The budget also includes funding for a pilot program supporting low-income parents seeking degrees in nursing and education. This program aims to empower families seeking to increase their quality of life while also increasing the number of high-demand workers in Arizona. In order to support Arizona families during the pandemic, the Child Care Administration has been supported by state and federal efforts. The executive budget includes a fiscal year 2021 supplemental appropriation of $92.7 million that will continue to support Arizona families during these trying times. So far, the division has implemented several programs related to pandemic relief, including grants to childcare providers who remain open during the pandemic, childcare scholarships for essential workers, which allow parents in essential positions to be present for those in need, paying providers for the full day costs for all children, including children who only attend for a half day, and suspending the childcare waitlist, which continues to be a priority for the executive. The latest federal COVID-19 relief legislation included $250 million in additional funds for childcare. The executive is working closely with the Department of Economic Security to develop a proposed plan, which it will share with the legislature by the end of the month. I will now turn it over to my colleague Angel Flores to discuss the remainder of the health and welfare initiatives.
Good afternoon. My name is Angel Flores, and I'm a budget analyst at OSPB. Another program administered by DES is Adult Protective Services. APS is charged with investigating allegations of abuse, neglect, and exploitation of vulnerable adults. Investigators in this program are often the first point of contact in these complex situations. Both the population served by this program and reports of neglect have grown in recent years. In 2020, reports of neglect grew by 20% and are expected to grow at a similar rate in 2021 and 2022 due to isolation caused by the pandemic. Arizona has made strides in the last year, improving services and making processes more efficient so that vulnerable adults are better cared for in Arizona. To support the continuation of this effort, the executive budget includes $2.9 million to fund 46 new employees and reduce the caseload burden of investigators. The executive budget includes funding for the implementation of the Family First Prevention Services Act, or FFPSA, as required by the Federal Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018. FFPSA restricts the use of Title IV-E funding for group home placements as depicted in the charts on the slide, and incentivizes states to focus child safety interventions on prevention services. It requires that when out-of-home placement is necessary, a child is placed in the least restrictive, most family-like setting appropriate for their needs. In preparation for implementation, the Department of Child Safety has focused efforts on foster home recruitment, QRTP development, and the design and standardization of parent skill-based programs. The Department of Child Safety's comprehensive health plan is set to go live on April 1st. CHP will allow department caseworkers and staff to have real-time access to a child's information and improve the timeliness and quality of a child's medical, dental, and behavioral health services when in foster care. The integrated health plan has a net zero cost. Current funding will be shifted from the CMDP and REBA plans to DCS's CHP under 4 new special line items. Finally, the executive is dedicated to addressing the ongoing opioid crisis. As part of the Opioid Action Plan in January 2018, $10 million was deposited from the general fund to the Substance Use Disorder Services Fund to provide services to Arizonans struggling with substance abuse. Between February 2018 and October 2020, the funding has provided nearly 55,000 substance use disorder treatment services, including co-pays, doctor visits, lab tests, and methadone administration to more than 33,000 underinsured or uninsured individuals. The original deposit will be fully expended by the end of FY2021. To continue providing access to opioid treatment services for eligible Arizonans, the executive supports a $6 million deposit from the Prescription Drug Rebate Fund to the SUDS Fund in support of to support an additional 18,000 Arizonans in FY2022. With that, I will hand it over to my colleagues Charlotte and Kylie to discuss the public safety initiatives included in the executive budget.
Thank you, Angel. Good afternoon. My name is Charlotte Hall, and I'm a budget analyst at OSPB. Kylie and I will be providing a brief overview of some of the public safety initiatives included in the fiscal year 2022 executive budget, which makes strategic investments to enhance and modernize public safety statewide, provides competitive pay for targeted personnel, and equips public safety workers with the tools they need to fulfill their mission. A cornerstone of the executive budget is a comprehensive investment in the Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation, and Reentry. The vast majority of that money will go towards three primary goals: repairing aged infrastructure, supporting bed management capacity, and expanding substance abuse treatment opportunities for inmates. The next three slides will provide additional details on some of these investments. The executive budget supports a $54 million appropriation to fully fund the department's building renewal formula and address critical infrastructure needs at the Iman complex. Each year, the Arizona Department of Administration calculates how much funding should be given to various state agencies to responsibly care for the buildings in their jurisdiction. Fiscal year 2022 will mark the first year the department's formula has been fully funded. Priority will be given to fire and life safety projects such as fire alarm and suppression system replacement and door and lock refurbishment. The executive budget provides $17.9 million to fund a multi-phase project that will deactivate the majority of the Florence prison complex with the exception of the Globe unit, partner with third parties to house inmates, and move existing staff from the Florence prison to the Iman prison complex. Inmates will be placed in safer environments that are more conducive to rehabilitation and provide increased programming opportunities. As the tables on the slide indicate, both the Iman and Florence complex face problematic CO2 vacancy rates that make achieving safe, desired staffing levels difficult and sometimes impossible. This proposal will eliminate the CO vacancy rate at Iman and reduce the vacancy rate at other complexes. The deactivation of the Florence prison complex, which was built in 1908 and is past the point of repair, will save the state an estimated $150 to $400 million. The executive budget also includes a $5 million increase in funding to expand the provision of substance abuse treatment services to inmates. This significant expansion is projected to allow an additional 2,527 inmates to complete DUI, moderate, or intensive substance abuse counseling annually. The funding will increase the department's treatment capacity from 13% to 36%, granting more inmates the opportunity to receive the impactful treatment they are needing. Departmental data indicated that the recidivism rate for inmates who graduated from a substance abuse program was 36%, which is 16% lower than inmates who did not receive treatment. Recidivism reduction impacts the lives of offenders and their family. Additionally, it represents a significant cost savings to the state. Up next, my colleague Kylie will discuss additional public safety investments included in this year's budget.
Good afternoon. My name is Kylie Jensen, and I'm a budget analyst at OSPB. In order to ensure the safety, efficiency, and transparency of DPS's troopers and sworn personnel, the executive budget provides a comprehensive body camera plan to equip every sworn member at DPS with their own body cameras. This funding provides for back-end equipment and software associated with the cameras, as well as for 29 staff responsible for video management and redaction services. DPS troopers are often required to extend their shifts when responding to collisions, protests, rallies, storms, and other emergencies, and when completing investigations. To compensate troopers for overtime hours worked, current practice is for them to adjust out their week by taking a corresponding amount of time off or by taking the overtime hours as comp time. The executive budget increases DPS's overtime budget to cover 45 hours of overtime per year per employee. In past years, DPS has been unable to fill allocated cadet trooper slots at the State Trooper Academy. Please see the graph. In each of the last two prior classes, DPS could fill only 26 of 52 cadet state trooper slots at the academy. The executive budget increases funding to aid DPS in recruiting additional cadets for the academy. DPS owns, operates, and maintains a statewide microwave network that provides critical public safety radio communications for 12 state agencies, 12,000 users, and a number of local, federal, and tribal agencies. The microwave infrastructure has been aging and not supported by the industry for over 20 years. These upgrades will modernize DPS's radio system and will provide peace of mind to first responders, ensuring 99.999% reliability, or a maximum downtime of 5 minutes in any 12-month period. The budget plans to have these critical updates completed at the end of FY2024. The appropriation is advance appropriated and lapses after 2 years, similar to other capital projects. Next, along with my colleague Teresa, we will give a brief overview of the executive's natural resource initiatives. The executive budget reaffirms the state's commitment to a cleaner environment and strengthens Arizona's fire preparedness to address the growing risks of wildfires. Arizona's wildfire risk continues to increase for reasons such as Arizona is currently in its 21st year of a long-term drought. The ending of logging in Arizona, coupled with failures in federal land management policy, have led to extreme overgrowth in Arizona's forests. Arizona's population continues to grow, and human activity causes a majority of wildfires. And generally speaking, lightning is the ignition source for non-human caused fires. And Arizona is in the top 3 states in strikes per year. And most of those happen during the peak of fire season. Note that 17% of Arizona's housing units are located in areas with moderate wildfire risk, and 9% are within areas of high and extreme risk. Due to the circumstances mentioned in the previous slide, Arizona faces a larger number of fires at a higher per acre cost. To address this more dangerous environment, the executive budget repays all outstanding cost-share fire bills that the state owes federal partners from abnormally high concentration of prior year fires on state land, increases the governor's emergency, and increase general fund deposit into the fire suppression fund to reflect the state's higher costs associated with recent increases in multi-jurisdictional fires. The Arizona Healthy Forest Initiative is comprised of 3 pillars. The first pillar includes hiring new DFFM employees to facilitate the program and oversee inmates. Over a 2-year period, 72 10-person inmate crews will be deployed in 4 geographically strategic locations. This new capacity will be phased in to have 50% of the capacity in place in FY2022 and 100% in place in FY2023. The second pillar comprises an increase in funding for hazardous fuel reduction projects by external partners. The third pillar involves the expansion of DFFM's ability to enter into agreements with other entities, including local governments and utilities, for fuels reduction projects through statutory changes. In total, these efforts should increase the number of acres treated each year for hazardous fuels from 4,000 to 20,000. While still working alongside federal partners to reduce wildfire risk on federal lands, this critical public safety initiative reflects a shift in strategy to one where the state takes a much larger role in reducing wildfire risks to our communities and their assets. Next up is Teresa to discuss the WARF program.
Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Wenzel, and I am a budget analyst at OSPB. The Water Quality Assurance Revolving Fund Program, known as WARF, is Arizona's alternative to the United States Environmental Protection Agency's approach to remediation of contaminated hazardous waste sites. The executive recommends continuing the ongoing $10 million in funding from the FY21 budget, with an additional $5 million to fully fund the program. Program prioritization will be given to mitigating a per- and polyfluoroalkyl substance plume threatening the City of Tucson's central water production well field. Next, my colleague Zach and I will be providing a brief overview of the Government That Works section. The executive budget exhibits innovative solutions for better government through investments in secure data protection, robust economic development, and stewardship of capital assets. The executive budget includes $173 million for capital projects and building renewal. With this funding, the state can address critical fire and life safety repairs, enhance transportation infrastructure, work to restore the historic state capitol, renovate state fish hatcheries, and address necessary repairs at the state fairgrounds. Additional focus will be given to building renewal projects that target the consolidation of building space. This is aimed at reducing unnecessary state buildings and addressing growing deferred maintenance costs at state-owned facilities. The executive budget provides funding for an enterprise-wide hoteling pilot in order to innovatively and responsibly administer more flexible workplaces for state employees. As shown in the figure, the number of state employees teleworking increased significantly from 2,000 in February to over 16,000 in December.
Hoteling refers to using a temporary unassigned workspace in a state building as needed. The state hopes to sustainably consolidate space, improve air quality, increase employee recruitment and retention, and achieve financial savings related to rent and facility management as a result. The executive also recommends allowing building renewal funds to be used for the modification of existing workspaces for hybrid working arrangements and space consolidation initiatives. I will now turn it over to my colleague Zach Harris for the remainder of this section.
Good afternoon. My name is Zach Harris, and I'm a budget analyst at Destination for Business, as evidenced in the pre-pandemic economic growth of the state and the relative resilience that the state has experienced during the pandemic. With the targeted investment in technology, it will only get better. The executive budget includes $7.8 million for continued development of a business one-stop web portal, a straightforward online portal to complete all state government functions needed to start a business. The project is an ongoing partnership between the Department of Administration, Commerce Authority, Corporation Commission, Department of Revenue, and the Secretary of State. Efforts in FY2022 will give Arizona entrepreneurs a single website to complete all state government processes required to start a business, accelerating business creation and minimizing delays at state agencies. High-speed internet is essential for accelerating economic development, enhancing education, expanding access to healthcare, improving public safety, and modernizing government services. Amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, expanding broadband services is more important than ever before. To date, the executive has established a statewide broadband office within the Arizona Commerce Authority to centrally coordinate broadband planning, reduced regulatory hurdles for broadband infrastructure at the Arizona State Land Department, and awarded $3 million in broadband. The fiscal response to COVID-19.
Thank you, Zach. Again, good afternoon. My name is Jason Misselbauer, and I am a grant compliance manager with OSPB. I will be discussing the significant federal resource the state to the COVID-19 public health pandemic. Since last March, there have been 7 federal measures enacted by the federal government that have provided COVID-related funding to the state of Arizona. These measures comprise the COVID-related covered funds for reporting and compliance purposes and are generically referred to as the CARES Act funding. To date, Arizona has received in excess of $35 billion in federal funds from these measures. The majority of this funding has consisted of direct economic impact payments from the IRS to eligible Arizona taxpayers, direct loans and grants for Arizona businesses from programs like the Payroll Protection Program, or PPP, and direct payments to hospitals, healthcare facilities, and providers from the Provider Relief Fund. As mentioned earlier, the CARES Act also established the $150 billion Coronavirus Relief Fund, CRF, through which the U.S. Department of the Treasury made direct payments to states, tribes, and eligible units of local government with populations exceeding 500,000. The state of Arizona was allocated a total of $2.86 billion, with the Office of the Governor directly receiving $1.86 billion. With this funding, the governor has prioritized the health and safety of its residents and made a commitment to ensuring that Arizonans have access to the resources needed to recover fully from the pandemic. From the $1.86 billion in CRF funding received, the governor's office has implemented the $440 million AZ CARES Fund, which provided support to local governments, the $370 million Enrollment Stabilization Grant Program for K-12 support, and provided over $400 million in state agency direct response activities, including the invaluable and critical work of the Arizona Department of Health Services. To date, 100% of the funding has been committed, with the remaining unobligated funds reserved for the state's Unemployment Trust Fund as we continue to monitor its solvency. To discuss the Unemployment Trust Fund further, I will turn it over to my colleague, Dean Johnson.
Thank you, Jason. My name is Dean Johnson, and I'm an IT and data manager at OSPB. Looking back at the previous year's initial unemployment claims, we see that prior to the declared pandemic, our weekly claims were sustaining at 4,000 for each reporting period. Beginning in mid-March, initial claims began rising and peaked in early April at over 129,000 claims. This represents an over 3,000% increase. In response to this dramatic rise, the governor took action and suspended the 1-week waiting period in order to ensure Arizonans would receive benefits as quickly as possible. While these extreme levels began decreasing relatively quickly, the overall weekly claims have averaged about 18,000 for the second half of the year. These sustained levels have far exceeded the peak experienced during the Great Recession between 2007 and 2009. Similar to the initial claims, continued unemployment claims rose drastically beginning in early April, increasing from 17,000 requests for benefits to over 300,000 weekly recurring claims. This represents a 1,600% increase. However, unlike the first-time benefits, the continued claims have remained high for a majority of the year, averaging 210,000 for the second half of the year. It was not until October that the continued claims dropped below the levels that we saw during the Great Recession. Due to the impact of rising and continued unemployment benefit claims, over $1.6 billion since April, the UI Trust Fund is under stress and unaided is expected to drop below zero in early 2021. In order to ensure solvency, timely benefit payments, and to avoid federal loan assistance, available CRF funding will be applied in recurring transfers when the overall UI Trust Fund balance drops below $50 million. I'll now turn it over to Perrin to conclude this section.
Good afternoon. My name is Perrin Williams, and I am a budget analyst with OSPB. As part of last year's bipartisan state budget agreement, $50 million was appropriated for Arizona's COVID-19 response with the establishment of the Crisis Contingency and Safety Net Fund. The Office of the Governor has utilized this funding to provide direct relief to communities, aid Arizonans needing eviction assistance, support small businesses, increase nonprofit and healthcare provider resources, invest in food banks, and provide the necessary resources to assist Arizona's transient and homeless population. There is approximately $4 million remaining in the Crisis Contingency and Safety Net Fund. On December 27, 2020, President Trump signed the Omnibus Appropriations Bill, which included the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. This most recent stimulus bill will provide an estimate of $11.5 billion in additional federal resources to support Arizona's response to COVID-19 and strengthen the state's economic recovery. Through programs such as the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, epidemiology and laboratory capacity funding, and existing CDC immunization and vaccines for children cooperative agreements, K-12 education, rental assistance, and direct COVID response activities, including testing and vaccine administration, will continue to provide relief and resources to Arizonans amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. The stated allocations are still estimates, but funding for many of the major programs is anticipated later this month. The executive is receiving additional funding to strategically use these resources to meet the immediate health, educational, and economic needs of Arizonans. Next, I will turn it back over to Director Gress to conclude today's presentation.
Perrin. So this budget maintains fiscal discipline, as have all of our other budgets. And you can see in fiscal year 2022, total revenues of $13 billion with a tax reform package, year one of a 3-year plan of $200 million for bringing our adjusted revenues to $12.8 billion. A total spending plan of $12.62 billion, the largest spending plan in state history, still leaving us with $219 million in cash and $51 million in structural balance. In his State of the State address, Governor Ducey said that if 2020 was the year of the virus, then 2021 will be the year of the vaccine. Its rollout and administration is the state's top priority, so that every Arizonan who wants a vaccine can get one. That vaccine will provide us a way out and into a more hopeful, more normal future. I'd like to thank all of the staff who contributed to this amazing work. We've spent countless months and hours. We appreciate our state agencies working with us in collaboration to get to this point, and look forward to negotiating the budget with our legislative partners in the months to come. If you'd like to find out more information about our budget, you can visit azgovernor.gov or azospb.gov. Thank you, and this concludes our presentation.